The widow Frances Stanton was splitting kindling behind her weathered cabin when she noticed the blood trail leading past her gate. And in that moment, on a frost-bitten January morning in 1877, her quiet life in Loveland, Colorado, would never be the same again. She set down the axe carefully against the woodpile and wiped her palms on her worn apron, her breath making small clouds in the cold mountain air. The blood was fresh, bright red against the patches of snow that still clung to the earth despite the weak sunshine trying to warm the valley. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she followed the trail with her eyes, noting how it led toward the stand of ponderosa pines that marked the edge of her property. She was 24 years old and had been alone for 2 years since consumption took her husband Thomas, and in that time, she had learned to be cautious but not cowardly. Frances walked back to the woodpile and retrieved the axe, feeling its familiar weight in her hands. The kindling could wait. She followed the blood trail slowly, her boots crunching on the frozen ground, her eyes scanning the tree line for any sign of danger. The war with the Ute people had ended years ago, but there were still occasional tensions, and then there were the usual threats of the frontier. Outlaws, wild animals, desperate men made cruel by harsh winters. She found him collapsed against a pine tree, his dark coat soaked with blood from a wound in his side. He was young, maybe 26 or 27, with sandy brown hair that fell across his forehead and a face that would have been handsome if it were not twisted with pain. His eyes were closed, and for a moment Frances thought he might be dead, but then she saw the shallow rise and fall of his chest. "Mister," she said softly, keeping the axe ready. "Can you hear me?" His eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then sharpening as they found her face. They were an unusual color, green like new leaves in spring, and despite his obvious pain, there was something gentle in them that made Frances lower the axe slightly. "I am sorry," he said, his voice rough. "I did not mean to bring trouble to your door. I tried to get farther, but my horse threw me a mile back. Who shot you?" "3 men. They robbed the stage from Denver yesterday. I am a deputy marshal." He tried to reach for something in his coat and winced, the movement sending a fresh stream of blood seeping through his fingers where they clutched his side. "My badge is in my pocket." Frances made a decision. She could leave him here to die, which would be the safe choice, or she could help him, which might bring those 3 men to her door. But she had been raised by a mother who believed in doing what was right even when it was hard, and she could not leave a lawman to bleed out in the snow. "Can you walk if I help you?" "I can try." She set the axe down and moved to his side, draping his arm across her shoulders. He was taller than her by nearly a foot and solid with muscle, and it took all her strength to help him to his feet. He bit back a groan as they started toward the cabin, moving slowly across the frozen ground. By the time they reached her door, they were both breathing hard, and Frances kicked it open with her boot and helped him inside to the narrow bed in the corner of the main room. "What is your name?" she asked as she fetched her medical supplies from the shelf, the same kit that had failed to save her husband but might save this stranger. Fletcher Grant." He tried to smile, but it came out as more of a grimace. "And you are an angel of mercy whose name I should know before I die." "You are not going to die, and I am Frances Stanton. Now hold still while I cut away your shirt." She worked quickly and efficiently, her hands steady despite the fear that fluttered in her chest. The bullet had passed through his side, missing vital organs but taking a good chunk of flesh with it. She cleaned the wound with whiskey, ignoring his sharp intake of breath, then packed it with clean cloth and bound it tightly. All the while she was aware of his eyes on her face, watching her with an intensity that made her self-conscious. "You have done this before," he said when she had finished. My husband was injured in a mining accident a few months before the consumption took him. I learned basic nursing from the doctor in town." She stood and carried the bloody cloths to the basin, washing her hands thoroughly. "You need to rest. Those men who shot you, will they come looking?" "I do not know. I winged one of them before they got away. They might think I am dead." Fletcher tried to shift on the bed and pain flashed across his face. "I need to get word to the marshal in Denver. They were heading south toward Pueblo. That will have to wait until you are stronger. Right now you need food and rest." Frances moved to the stove, grateful that she had made a pot of venison stew the night before. She ladled some into a bowl and brought it to him, helping him sit up enough to eat without choking. "Why are you helping me?" he asked between spoonfuls. "Most folks would have left me out there. Most folks did not take vows promising to help those in need." She sat in the chair by the bed, suddenly aware of how tired she was. "My mother was a minister's daughter. She believed in Christian charity, and she raised me to believe in it too. Your husband was a lucky man." The words brought an unexpected sting of tears to Frances's eyes, and she looked away quickly. "He was a good man. We had 3 years together before the consumption took him. This was his cabin, his claim. The mine played out 6 months after he died, but I have a garden in the summer and I take in sewing from the ladies in town. It is enough." They fell into silence, and Frances listened to the wind picking up outside, whistling through the gaps in the cabin walls. Night would come early in these winter months, and she needed to finish splitting the kindling and bring in more wood for the stove. But she found herself reluctant to leave Fletcher alone, afraid he might take a turn for the worse while she was outside. As if reading her thoughts, Fletcher said, "You should finish your chores. I will be fine for a few minutes." Frances nodded and stood, pulling her heavy coat from its peg by the door. Outside, the temperature had dropped further, and the sky to the west was darkening with the promise of snow. She worked quickly, splitting the kindling with swift, practiced strokes of the axe, then carrying armload after armload of wood into the cabin, until she had enough to last through the night and into the next day. When she came in with the last load, Fletcher was asleep, his breathing deeper and more regular than before. Frances banked the fire in the stove and lit the oil lamp on the table, then settled into her rocking chair with her sewing basket. She had promised Mrs. Henderson in town that she would have her new dress finished by the end of the week, and she was behind schedule. As she sewed, she found her gaze drifting to Fletcher's face. Even in sleep there was a strength to him, a quiet determination in the set of his jaw. She wondered what had led him to become a lawman, what kind of life he had led before he ended up bleeding on her property. She wondered if he had a wife somewhere, or a sweetheart waiting for word of his safety. The thought brought a flush to her cheeks, and she forced her attention back to her sewing. It had been 2 years since Thomas died, but she still wore her wedding ring and still thought of herself as a married woman. The loneliness sometimes felt like a physical weight on her chest, especially on the long winter nights when the wind howled and the cabin creaked, and she lay in her narrow bed remembering what it was like to have someone to hold, someone who made her feel safe and cherished. Snow began to fall as darkness settled over the valley, thick flakes that would make travel impossible by morning. Frances finished the bodice of Mrs. Henderson's dress and set it aside, then prepared herself a small supper of bread and cheese. She checked Fletcher's bandages and found them still clean and dry, a good sign. She had just settled back in her chair when Fletcher's eyes opened. He looked around the cabin slowly, taking in the rough-hewn walls, the simple furniture, the neat stacks of supplies on the shelves. "How long was I asleep?" "Several hours. How do you feel?" "Like I was shot." He tried to smile, and this time it reached his eyes, But better than before, you probably saved my life, Mrs. Stanton. Call me Francis, and you are welcome." She rose and brought him water, watching as he drank deeply. "Can you tell me what happened? With those men and the stage?" Fletcher handed back the cup and leaned his head against the wall behind the bed. "I was riding from Denver to Pueblo with dispatches when I came across the aftermath. The stage was stopped on the road, the driver and guard both dead, the passengers robbed of everything they had. There were 3 witnesses who said it was 3 men, all masked, but one of them had a distinctive horse, a paint with 3 white socks. And you went after them alone." "I sent a rider back to Denver for help and followed their trail. Caught up to them about 5 miles from here, in that narrow canyon where the road follows the creek." His jaw tightened at the memory. "I got the drop on them and called for them to surrender. One of them went for his gun, and I shot him in the shoulder. Then the other 2 opened fire and my horse went down. I took a bullet in the scramble but managed to get away on foot while they were trying to control their horses in the narrow space." "They might come back looking for you," Francis said, the fear she had been pushing down rising back up. "If they think you can identify them." "I know." Fletcher met her eyes steadily. "I will understand if you want me to leave. I should never have put you in danger like this." "You can barely stand. Where would you go?" Francis shook her head firmly. "No, you will stay here until you are well enough to travel. I have Thomas's rifle and I know how to use it. We will manage." "You are a remarkable woman, Francis Stanton." The way he said her name, with a warmth that seemed to wrap around each syllable, made something flutter in her chest. She turned away quickly, busying herself with stoking the fire in the stove. "I am just doing what anyone would do." "No," Fletcher said quietly. "You are doing what very few people would do, and I will never forget it." That night, Francis made a pallet for herself on the floor near the stove, giving Fletcher the bed. She lay awake for a long time, listening to the wind and the snow and the quiet sound of Fletcher's breathing, and wondering what the morning would bring. She woke to pale light filtering through the window and the smell of coffee. Confused, she sat up quickly and saw Fletcher standing by the stove, one hand pressed to his side, the other holding the coffee pot. "What are you doing?" she demanded, jumping to her feet. "You should be in bed." I needed to move around a bit. "Lying in bed all day will only make me weaker." He poured coffee into 2 cups, moving carefully but with more strength than she would have expected. "Besides, I wanted to do something useful. You have been so kind to me." Francis took the cup he offered, feeling the warmth seep into her cold fingers. The cabin was chilly despite the fire, the kind of bone-deep cold that came with mountain winters. Outside the window, she could see that at least 6 inches of snow had fallen during the night, covering everything in pristine white. "We will be snowed in for a few days at least," she said, more to herself than to Fletcher. "I have enough supplies, but I had planned to go to town tomorrow for fabric. Mrs. Henderson will be upset if her dress is not finished on time. I am sorry for the inconvenience. It is not your fault." Francis sipped her coffee and studied him over the rim of her cup. His color was better this morning, and though he moved stiffly, there was a vitality to him that had been absent the day before. "How is your wound?" "Sore, but I think it is healing well thanks to your excellent care." He returned to the bed and sat down carefully, relief crossing his face as he took the weight off his injury. "You never told me how you ended up here in Loveland, all alone on a played-out mining claim." Francis settled into her rocking chair, cradling her coffee. "Thomas and I came from Illinois in 1872. He had heard about the silver strikes in Colorado and was determined to make our fortune. We settled here because the land was cheap and there were rumors of silver in these mountains. We built this cabin together, the 2 of us, log by log. It took us most of that first summer. That must have been hard work. It was. But we were young and in love, and we believed we could do anything. She smiled at the memory. The pain of loss softened now by time into something more like bittersweet nostalgia. Thomas found a small vein of silver ore the second year. Not enough to make us rich, but enough to give us hope. Then he was injured in a cave-in, broke his ribs, and damaged his lungs. The doctor said it made him more susceptible to consumption. He lasted 6 months after the diagnosis. "I am sorry," Fletcher said, and the simple sincerity in his voice meant more than any flowery condolences could have. "It has been 2 years. I have learned to manage on my own, learned that I am stronger than I thought I was." Francis met his eyes directly. "What about you? How did a man like you end up as a deputy marshal, a man like me? Young, educated. I can tell by the way you speak. You come from good family, I would guess." Fletcher smiled ruefully. "My father owns a shipping business in Boston. He wanted me to follow in his footsteps, to spend my life in an office managing ledgers and writing letters. I tried for a year after I finished my schooling, but I felt like I was suffocating. So I came west in 1874, worked as a cowboy for a ranch near Cheyenne for a while, then signed on as a deputy when the marshal there said he needed good men." "Do you regret leaving your family?" "Sometimes. My mother writes letters begging me to come home, to take up my proper place in society." He shrugged, then winced as the movement pulled at his wound. "But I have never felt more alive than I do out here. Every day is different, every challenge is real and immediate. I can make a difference, help people, bring some measure of justice to a place that desperately needs it." "That is a noble calling," Francis said quietly. "No more noble than what you are doing, surviving out here on your own, helping a stranger at great risk to yourself." Their eyes met and held, and Francis felt that flutter in her chest again, stronger this time. She looked away first, standing abruptly and moving to the stove. "I should make breakfast. You need to eat to keep your strength up." She made flapjacks with the last of her flour, noting that she would need to make a trip to town as soon as the weather cleared. They ate in companionable silence, and afterward Francis changed Fletcher's bandages, pleased to see that the wound was closing cleanly with no signs of infection. The day passed slowly, as snowed-in days tend to do. Fletcher slept for several hours while Francis worked on Mrs. Henderson's dress, her needle flying through the fabric as she stitched the intricate details the woman had requested. When Fletcher woke, they talked, trading stories of their lives, their hopes, their regrets. Frances found herself laughing more than she had in months, charmed by Fletcher's dry wit and the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. "Tell me something," Fletcher said as twilight began to darken the windows. "Do you ever think about leaving here? Going back east, or maybe to Denver or Colorado Springs where life would be easier?" Francis considered the question carefully. "Sometimes, especially in winter when the cold seems to seep into my very bones, and I wonder if I will make it through another season. But this cabin represents the only happy years of my marriage. Thomas is buried on the hill behind the house, and leaving feels like abandoning him. Does that sound foolish? Not at all. Loyalty is a rare virtue." Fletcher shifted on the bed, trying to find a more comfortable position. "But I hope you know that he would not want you to be alone forever. You are too young, too full of life to spend the rest of your days in isolation." "I am not ready," Francis said simply. "I do not know if I ever will be." That night, as she lay on her pallet by the stove, Frances found herself thinking about Fletcher's words. Was she hiding out here, using her loyalty to Thomas as an excuse to avoid facing an uncertain future? She had been content, or at least she had told herself she was content, with her solitary life. But Fletcher's presence had awakened something in her, a longing for companionship and conversation and connection that she had tried to bury along with her husband. The snow continued through the next day and into the following night, piling up against the cabin walls and making it impossible to venture outside for more than a few minutes at a time. Frances and Fletcher fell into an easy rhythm, talking and reading aloud from her small collection of books and playing cards in the evening. Fletcher grew stronger each day, and by the third day of the storm he was able to walk around the cabin without too much difficulty, though he still tired easily. "I should help with the chores," he insisted on the fourth morning when the snow finally stopped and weak sunshine broke through the clouds. "You are still healing and going mad from sitting idle." He reached for his coat, which Frances had cleaned and mended as best she could. "At least let me split some kindling. You have been doing all the work while I have been lounging around like a gentleman of leisure." Frances wanted to argue, but the woodpile was getting low, and her back ached from all the chopping she had done over the past few days. "Very well. But if you start bleeding again, I will never forgive you." They went outside together, blinking in the bright sunlight reflecting off the snow. The world looked clean and new, the harsh edges of the frontier softened by the white blanket covering everything. Frances showed Fletcher where she kept the kindling pile and stood back to watch as he picked up the axe. "I used to do this as a boy," he said, setting up the first piece of wood. "My father believed in the value of manual labor, even for his children. Every winter we had to split enough wood to keep all the fireplaces in our house burning through the cold months." He brought the axe down with a clean stroke, splitting the wood neatly in two. Frances found herself admiring the way he moved, the economical grace of his motions despite his injury. He worked steadily for perhaps 15 minutes before she saw him falter, his hand moving to his side. "That is enough," she said firmly. "You are going to tear your stitches." Fletcher set down the axe and straightened slowly, his face pale. "I suppose you are right. But it felt good to do something useful, to contribute even in a small way." "You have contributed more than you know," Frances said softly. "These past few days have been the best I have had in a long time. The conversation, the companionship. It has reminded me that there is more to life than just surviving day to day." Fletcher looked at her intently, and Frances felt heat rise to her cheeks. There was something in his gaze that made her heart race, a warmth and interest that went beyond simple gratitude or friendship. "Frances," he began, then stopped. "I should not say this. I have no right, and my timing could not be worse. But these days with you have been remarkable. You are the most capable, most genuine person I have ever met. You have a strength in you that has nothing to do with physical prowess and everything to do with the content of your character." "Fletcher," she whispered, but she did not know what else to say. Her emotions were a tangle of longing and guilt, desire and fear. "I know it is too soon," he continued. "I know you are not ready, but I wanted you to know that when you are ready, if you ever are ready, I would count it the greatest honor of my life to court you properly." Tears sprang to Frances's eyes, surprising her. She had thought herself cried out years ago, but apparently there were still tears left for moments like this, moments when the future suddenly seemed less bleak and more full of possibility. "I do not know what to say." "You do not have to say anything. I just wanted you to know how I feel." Fletcher smiled, that gentle smile that made her stomach flip. "Now we should get back inside before we both freeze solid standing out here in the snow." That evening they were subdued, both of them processing what had been said and what it might mean. Frances worked on her sewing while Fletcher cleaned his gun, a companionable silence settling over the cabin. But there was a new awareness between them, a crackling tension that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with possibility. "I should try to make it to town tomorrow," Fletcher said as they prepared for bed. "Send a telegram to Denver, let them know what happened with those outlaws. You are not strong enough yet. I am strong enough, and the longer I wait, the colder the trail gets." He met her eyes across the cabin. "I promise I will be careful, but this is my job, Francis. Those men killed innocent people and they need to be brought to justice." Francis nodded reluctantly, knowing he was right but hating the thought of him leaving. "Then I will come with you. I need to get supplies anyway, and I can return Mrs. Henderson's dress. It is finished except for the hem." "I would like that," Fletcher said, his face brightening. They set out early the next morning, trudging through snow that came up to their knees in places. The 4-mile journey to Loveland took nearly 3 hours, and by the time they reached the small collection of buildings that made up the town, Francis's legs were burning with exhaustion, and Fletcher looked drawn and pale. The town was bustling despite the recent snow, with wagons and horses crowding the main street and people hurrying between buildings. Francis led Fletcher first to the telegraph office, where he sent his message to Denver and received a reply almost immediately instructing him to remain in Loveland until reinforcements could arrive. "They are sending 2 marshals and a tracker," Fletcher explained as they left the office. "Should be here in 3 or 4 days if the weather holds. They want me to stay put and recover." "Good," Francis said firmly. "You need the rest." They stopped next at the general store where Francis purchased flour, coffee, sugar, and several other essentials. The storekeeper, a rotund man named Mr. Patterson, raised his eyebrows at seeing her with a strange man but was too polite to comment directly. "Mrs. Stanton, good to see you," he said heartily as he tallied her purchases. "We were starting to worry about you after all that snow. You doing all right out there on your own?" "I am managing just fine, Mr. Patterson." Francis indicated Fletcher with a slight gesture. "This is Deputy Marshal Fletcher Grant. He was injured in the line of duty and I have been helping him recover." "A marshal, you say?" Mr. Patterson's eyes widened with interest. "What happened?" Fletcher gave a brief account of the stage robbery and the shootout, and by the time he finished, a small crowd had gathered in the store to listen. Francis could see the speculation in their eyes as they looked between her and Fletcher, and she knew the gossip would be all over town by nightfall. "Those outlaws still out there?" asked a grizzled miner named Jake Thompson. "Likely they have moved on by now," Fletcher said. "But I would advise everyone to be cautious until we can be certain they have left the area." The crowd dispersed slowly, and Francis paid for her supplies with the small amount of money she had earned from her sewing. They made one more stop at Mrs. Henderson's house, where the wealthy widow exclaimed over her new dress and paid Francis generously. "And who is this?" Mrs. Henderson asked, eyeing Fletcher with obvious interest. "Deputy Marshal Grant," Francis explained patiently. "He was injured and I have been helping him recover." "How charitable of you." Mrs. Henderson's tone suggested she thought it was something other than charity, and Francis felt her cheeks burn. "Well, you must both come to my dinner party next week. I am having several of the leading citizens of the town, and it would be wonderful to have a lawman in attendance. Everyone is so worried about those terrible outlaws." Francis wanted to refuse, but Fletcher accepted graciously before she could speak. As they walked away from the house, she shot him an exasperated look. "Why did you say yes? I have no proper dress for a dinner party, and you will likely be gone by then anyway. The marshals will not arrive for several days, and you heard what they said. I am to stay put and recover. As for a dress, you are the finest seamstress in town. I have seen your work. You can make yourself something beautiful in a week. It is not that simple." "I think it is exactly that simple." Fletcher stopped walking and turned to face her, his green eyes serious. "Francis, You have been hiding away in that cabin for 2 years. It is time to rejoin the world. Let people see you living again. What if I am not ready? Then you will figure that out at the dinner party. But I will be with you, and I promise I will not let any harm come to you, social or otherwise. Frances wanted to argue further, but the truth was that a part of her was excited by the prospect. It had been so long since she had attended any kind of social event, so long since she had dressed up and felt pretty and enjoyed the company of others. And the thought of going with Fletcher, of having him by her side, made her heart race in a way that was both thrilling and terrifying. The journey back to the cabin was easier now that they had broken a trail through the snow, and they arrived as the sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. Fletcher helped Frances carry the supplies inside, and they worked together to prepare a simple supper of beans and salt pork. "Thank you for today," Fletcher said as they ate. "For going with me to town, for standing by me when you could tell people were gossiping. It meant a great deal." "People will always gossip. I learned that long ago." Frances set down her fork and looked at him steadily. "But I want you to know that I am glad you are here. These past few days have made me realize how lonely I have been, how much I have been just going through the motions of living without really being alive. You have reminded me what it feels like to want something more." "What do you want?" Fletcher asked softly. Frances took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I want to feel joy again. I want to laugh without feeling guilty about it. I want to look forward to the future instead of always looking backward at what I have lost." She met his eyes directly. "And I want to see where this leads, whatever this is between us." Fletcher stood and moved to her side, kneeling carefully beside her chair so that their eyes were level. He took her hand in his calloused fingers warm and strong. "I am falling in love with you, Frances Stanton. I know it is too fast, too soon, but I cannot help what I feel. Every moment with you makes me more certain that I want to spend all my moments with you for as long as we both shall live." Tears were streaming down Frances's face now, but they were good tears, healing tears. "I am falling in love with you too, and it terrifies me because I do not know if I am betraying Thomas or if I am finally letting myself heal. But I cannot deny what I feel when I am with you." Fletcher lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "You are not betraying anyone. Love is not a finite resource. The love you had for your husband will always be a part of you, and that is as it should be. But you have room in your heart for more love, for a different kind of love, and I promise you that I will spend every day earning the gift of that love." Frances leaned forward and kissed him, softly at first, then with more passion as he responded. It was her first kiss in more than 2 years, and it felt like coming home and setting out on an adventure all at once. When they finally pulled apart, they were both breathless, and Fletcher rested his forehead against hers. "I wish I did not have to sleep on that bed alone tonight," he murmured. "You are still healing," Frances reminded him, though her body was singing with wants and needs she had tried to forget existed. "I know. And I want to do this right, to court you properly and marry you with all the ceremony and respect you deserve." He smiled ruefully. "But that does not mean I do not want you with every fiber of my being." "Soon," Frances promised. "When you are healed, when we are married, I want that too, more than I can say." The next few days passed in a blur of contentment. The weather held clear and cold, and Fletcher continued to gain strength. He split kindling every morning, insisting on doing his share of the work, and Frances watched him from the window as she sewed, her heart full in a way she had forgotten was possible. In the evenings they sat together by the fire, Fletcher reading aloud from her small collection of books while Frances worked on a new dress for herself, something simple but pretty in a deep blue fabric she had been saving for a special occasion. She was determined to look her best at Mrs. Henderson's dinner party, to show the town that she was moving forward with her life. On the fourth day after their trip to town, 3 men arrived at the cabin just as the sun was setting. Frances's heart leapt into her throat when she saw them through the window, but Fletcher recognized them immediately and went out to greet them. "Marshal Reeves, good to see you," he said, shaking hands with a tall, imposing black man with a marshal's badge pinned to his coat. "And Deputy Miller and Charlie Long, I was not expecting you until tomorrow." "We made good time," Marshal Reeves said in a deep, authoritative voice. "The weather has been clear and we pushed hard. Now tell me everything about this robbery and these outlaws." They came inside and Frances served coffee, while Fletcher gave a detailed account of everything that had happened. Marshal Reeves listened intently, occasionally asking questions, while Deputy Miller took notes and Charlie Long, a half-Apache tracker with weathered features and keen eyes, studied a map. "The one I shot was wounded in his left shoulder," Fletcher said. "If he sought medical attention anywhere in the area, someone will have seen him." "We will start asking around in the morning," Marshal Reeves said. He looked at Frances with respect and a hint of curiosity. "Mrs. Stanton, Deputy Grant speaks very highly of you. He says you saved his life." "I did what anyone would do," Frances said, uncomfortable with the praise. "No, madam, you did what very few people would do, taking in a stranger, putting yourself at risk." He nodded approvingly. "The territory needs more people like you." The marshals camped outside the cabin that night, insisting they did not want to intrude on Frances's hospitality further. But they returned at dawn, and after a quick breakfast Fletcher prepared to leave with them. Frances helped him pack his few belongings, her heart heavy at the thought of him leaving even though she knew it was necessary. At the door he turned and pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "I will be back as soon as I can," he promised. "A few days, a week at most. We need to track these men and bring them in, but then I am requesting a leave of absence. I want to spend time with you to court you properly." "Be careful," Frances whispered against his chest. "I just found you. I cannot lose you now." "You will not lose me, I promise." He tilted her chin up and kissed her deeply, a kiss full of promise and passion and hope. "I love you, Frances. I love you too." She stood in the doorway and watched as the 4 men rode away into the sunrise, Fletcher turning in his saddle to wave one last time before they disappeared over the ridge. Then she went back inside and sat in her rocking chair and allowed herself a brief moment of tears before squaring her shoulders and getting back to work. There was wood to split and sewing to finish and a dinner party to prepare for, and she would not waste the gift Fletcher had given her by falling back into despair. The week passed slowly. Frances finished her blue dress and was pleased with how it turned out, the fabric draping elegantly and the cut flattering her figure. She cleaned the cabin from top to bottom, washed her hair, and tried not to worry about Fletcher and the dangers he might be facing. 2 days before Mrs. Henderson's dinner party, she had a visitor. She looked up from her sewing to see a horse approaching the cabin, and her heart leapt until she realized it was not Fletcher but a woman she did not recognize. The rider was young, perhaps 21 or 22, with dark hair pinned up under a practical hat, and a divided riding skirt that marked her as someone who valued function over fashion. "Mrs. Stanton," the woman called as she dismounted. "My name is Sarah Whitfield. I own the ranch about 10 miles east of here. I heard in town that you have been helping Deputy Grant, and I wanted to thank you." Frances invited her inside and put on a pot of coffee, curious about this unexpected visitor. Sarah settled at the table and smiled warmly. "Fletcher is my cousin," she explained. My mother and his father are siblings. I moved out here 3 years ago after my parents died, bought a ranch with my inheritance. Fletcher visits me whenever he is in the area. He is like a brother to me." "I did not know he had family nearby," Francis said, feeling a surge of warmth toward this woman who clearly cared about Fletcher. He probably did not mention it because he did not want to impose. That is Fletcher all over, always thinking of others before himself. Sarah accepted the coffee gratefully and took a sip. "But I heard from Mrs. Henderson that you are coming to her dinner party together, and I wanted to meet you before then. The gossip in town is running wild, and I wanted you to know that I think it is wonderful. Fletcher deserves happiness, and from everything I have heard, so do you." "Thank you," Francis said softly, touched by Sarah's kindness. "That means a great deal." They talked for over an hour, and by the time Sarah left, Francis felt like she had made a true friend. Sarah invited her to visit the ranch anytime, and Francis promised she would once Fletcher returned. The day of the dinner party dawned clear and cold. Francis dressed carefully in her new blue gown, pinning up her dark blonde hair in a style she had not attempted since before Thomas died. She studied herself in the small mirror and was surprised by what she saw. The woman looking back at her was not the grief-stricken widow who had been hiding away in a mountain cabin. She looked alive, vibrant, her gray eyes bright with anticipation. She was just pulling on her cloak when she heard the sound of hoofbeats outside. Her heart leapt as she rushed to the door and flung it open to see Fletcher riding up the path, a huge smile on his handsome face. "You are back," she cried, running out to meet him despite the cold. He dismounted and caught her in his arms, spinning her around before setting her down and kissing her soundly. "I told you I would be back in time. Do you think I would miss our first official outing together? Did you catch them, the outlaws?" "We did. Tracked them to a cabin near Pueblo." They did not put up much of a fight once they realized they were surrounded. His face grew serious. "They will hang for what they did to that stage driver and guard. Justice will be served. I am so glad you are safe." Francis touched his face, reassuring herself that he was real and whole. "I was so worried. I am fine, better than fine now that I am with you again." Fletcher stepped back and looked at her appreciatively. "You look absolutely beautiful. Is this the dress you were working on? Do you like it?" "I love it. You are going to be the most beautiful woman at the party." He grinned. "Give me 15 minutes to wash up and change into my clean clothes, and then we can go. I have so much to tell you." They rode into town together, Fletcher on his horse and Francis on the gentle mare she kept for such trips. The sun was setting as they arrived at Mrs. Henderson's large house on the edge of town, and light spilled from every window, welcoming and warm. The dinner party was more formal than Francis had expected, with nearly 20 guests in attendance, including the mayor, the doctor, several prominent businessmen and their wives, and to Francis's delight, Sarah Whitfield. Sarah waved at them from across the room and made her way over immediately. "Cousin and Mrs. Stanton, you look lovely." Sarah embraced them both warmly. "I am so glad you are both here." The evening passed in a pleasant blur. Frances found herself relaxing, enjoying the conversation and the excellent food, and the way Fletcher kept finding excuses to touch her hand or stand close to her. She could see the speculation in people's eyes, but for once she did not care what they thought. She was happy, truly happy, and she was not going to let anything dim that joy. After dinner, as the ladies gathered in the parlor and the men retired to the study for cigars and brandy, Mrs. Henderson cornered Francis with a knowing smile. "You and the marshal seem very close," she said, not bothering with subtlety. "We are," Francis admitted. "He is a good man." "He is more than that, dear. He is a man who looks at you like you hung the moon." Mrs. Henderson patted her hand kindly. Thomas was a good man too, and he would want you to be happy. Do not let misplaced guilt keep you from embracing a new chance at love. The words, so similar to what Fletcher had said, brought tears to Frances's eyes. Thank you. That means more than you know. The party broke up around 10 o'clock, and Fletcher helped Frances into her cloak before they stepped out into the cold night. Instead of heading immediately to their horses, Fletcher led her to the small park in the center of town, where a bench sat beneath a bare cottonwood tree. "I have something to ask you," he said, his voice suddenly nervous. "I know we have not known each other long, barely more than 2 weeks, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life." He took both her hands in his. "Frances Stanton, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Frances's breath caught in her throat. She had known this was coming, had hoped for it, but hearing the actual words spoken aloud made it real in a way that took her breath away. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Fletcher Grant, I will marry you." He pulled her into his arms and kissed her under the cold Colorado stars, and Frances felt like she was finally, truly alive again. All the grief and loneliness of the past 2 years seemed to fall away, replaced by a blazing hope for the future. "I have already spoken to the minister," Fletcher said when they finally pulled apart. "He can marry us next Saturday if that is not too soon. I know some people will think we are rushing, but I do not want to wait. I want to start our life together as soon as possible." "Neither do I," Frances agreed. "I have already grieved enough, waited enough. I want to seize this happiness with both hands while I can." They rode back to the cabin together, neither wanting to part for the night. Fletcher built up the fire while Frances made tea, and they sat together on the bed, his arm around her shoulders, talking about their plans for the future. "I have some money saved," Fletcher said. "Not a fortune, but enough to buy supplies and maybe a few head of cattle. I was thinking we could build up your late husband's property, turn it into a working ranch. I can take work as a deputy marshal when it is available, but I want to build something with you, something that is ours." "I would like that," Frances said softly. Thomas dreamed of this place being more than just a played-out mine. He would be happy knowing it will be a real homestead. "Tell me about him," Fletcher said. "I want to know about the man who had the privilege of loving you first." So Frances talked late into the night about Thomas, about their dreams and struggles, their laughter and their sorrow. Fletcher listened intently, asking questions, and Frances realized that he was not jealous of her first husband but honored his memory by wanting to understand him. "He sounds like he was a fine man," Fletcher said when she had finished. "I wish I could have known him. I think we would have been friends." "I think so too." Frances leaned her head against his shoulder. "He would have liked you. He always said he wanted me to find happiness if something happened to him. I just never thought I would. But you have. I have. With you." The week before the wedding passed in a flurry of activity. Sarah helped Frances make a simple but elegant wedding dress in cream-colored silk that Sarah had been saving for a special occasion. The women of the town, hearing of the upcoming marriage, surprised Frances by organizing a quilting bee and presenting her with a beautiful wedding quilt. Fletcher spent his days working on the cabin, reinforcing the walls and adding shelves and making small improvements that would make their life together more comfortable. In the evenings, they would sit together by the fire, making plans and dreaming about their future. "I sent a letter to my parents," Fletcher said one evening, "telling them about you, about our marriage. I do not know if they will respond, but I wanted them to know that I have found happiness out here, that I have found the woman I want to spend my life with. Do you think they will be upset that you are not marrying someone from their social circle? Probably. But I do not care. You are worth more than 1,000 society women who have never done an honest day's work in their lives." He pulled her close and kissed the top of her head. You are real and strong and true, and I love you more than I ever thought it was possible to love another person." Saturday dawned clear and bright, one of those perfect winter days when the sky is so blue it almost hurts to look at, and the air is crisp and clean. Frances dressed in her new gown with Sarah's help, her hands trembling with nerves and excitement. "You look beautiful," Sarah said, adjusting the small wreath of dried flowers Frances wore in her hair. "Fletcher is the luckiest man in Colorado." The wedding was held in the small church in Loveland, with what seemed like half the town in attendance. Frances walked down the aisle alone, having no family to give her away, but she did not feel alone. She felt surrounded by love and support, by a community that had rallied around her in her time of need. Fletcher waited for her at the altar, looking handsome in his best suit, his green eyes shining with love and joy. The minister spoke about the sacred bond of marriage, about commitment and love and partnership, and then Frances and Fletcher exchanged their vows, promising to love and honor each other for as long as they both lived. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister said with a smile. "You may kiss your bride." Fletcher pulled Frances into his arms and kissed her deeply, and the church erupted in applause and cheers. Frances laughed against his lips, deliriously happy, and Fletcher grinned down at her. "Hello, Mrs. Grant." "Hello, husband." There was a reception at Mrs. Henderson's house, with food and music and dancing. Frances danced with Fletcher and with several other men from town, feeling light and free and happier than she had ever imagined she could feel again. As the sun began to set, Fletcher took her hand and led her outside. "Ready to go home?" "So ready." They rode back to the cabin together through the gathering dusk, and Fletcher carried Frances over the threshold, both of them laughing. He set her down gently and then pulled her close, his expression turning serious. "I love you, Frances Grant. I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret saying yes to me." "I could never regret it," Frances whispered. "You have given me back my life, given me a reason to hope again." Their wedding night was tender and passionate, a joining of two people who had found each other against all odds. Fletcher was gentle with Frances, understanding that it had been a long time for her, and she responded to him with a passion that surprised them both. Afterward they lay entwined in each other's arms, talking softly about everything and nothing, simply enjoying the closeness and the knowledge that they belonged to each other now. The winter slowly gave way to spring, the snow melting and revealing the brown earth beneath. Fletcher threw himself into improving the property, building a larger barn and fencing in pasture for the small herd of cattle he purchased with his savings. Frances planted a huge garden, much larger than the one she had maintained as a widow, and helped Fletcher with the heavy work when he needed an extra pair of hands. Marshal Reeves offered Fletcher a permanent position as a deputy marshal based out of Loveland, which would allow him to work, but also spend most of his time at home with Frances. Fletcher accepted gratefully, and over the next few months he developed a reputation as a fair and effective lawman who could be depended upon in a crisis. One evening in late June, Frances made an announcement over dinner that made Fletcher drop his fork in surprise. "I am with child," she said, both nervous and excited. "The doctor confirmed it today when I went to town. The baby should come in late January or early February." Fletcher let out a whoop of joy and swept her into his arms, spinning her around the cabin before setting her down carefully as if she were made of glass. "A baby! We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Frances asked, even though his reaction had made his feelings abundantly clear. "Happy. I am ecstatic, overjoyed, thrilled beyond measure." He kissed her soundly and then knelt down and placed a gentle hand on her still flat stomach. "Hello in there, little one. Your mother and I are already so in love with you." Tears streamed down Frances's face as she looked down at her husband, this man who had come into her life bleeding and half dead and had somehow become her whole world. "I love you so much. I love you too. Both of you." The months of Frances's pregnancy were some of the happiest of her life. Fletcher doted on her, refusing to let her do any heavy work and constantly fretting about her health and comfort. Sarah visited often, bringing hand-me-down baby clothes and sharing advice from her experiences helping deliver babies on the ranch. The women of Loveland rallied around Frances once again, throwing her a party and bringing gifts for the coming baby. In early February of 1878, on a cold night with snow falling softly outside, Frances went into labor. Fletcher rode to town to fetch the doctor and Mrs. Henderson, who had experience as a midwife, and then spent the long hours of labor pacing the cabin floor and praying harder than he ever had in his life. Just before dawn, a healthy baby boy entered the world, squalling lustily and waving tiny fists in indignation at the cold air. Frances was exhausted but radiant as the doctor placed the baby in her arms, and Fletcher knelt beside the bed with tears streaming down his face. "He is perfect," Fletcher whispered, touching one tiny hand with a gentle finger. "Absolutely perfect. What should we name him?" Frances asked. They had discussed names over the past months but had never quite settled on one. Now, looking down at their son's red face and dark hair, Fletcher smiled. "What about Matthew? It means gift of God, and that is what he is. A gift." "Matthew Fletcher Grant," Frances said softly. "I love it." The weeks after Matthew's birth were exhausting but wonderful. Frances recovered quickly, and she and Fletcher fell into the rhythms of new parenthood, taking turns walking the floor with the baby at night and marveling at every tiny milestone. Fletcher proved to be a devoted father, spending hours just holding his son and talking to him softly about all the things they would do together when Matthew was older. Spring came again, and then summer, and life settled into a comfortable routine. Fletcher continued his work as a deputy marshal, though he turned down assignments that would take him away from home for extended periods. Frances's garden flourished, providing vegetables for their table and extras to sell in town. The cattle herd grew slowly but steadily, and Fletcher hired a local teenager to help with the ranch work during the busy seasons. On a warm evening in September, Fletcher and Frances sat on the porch they had built onto the front of the cabin, watching the sun set behind the mountains while Matthew slept in a cradle at their feet. Fletcher had his arm around Frances's shoulders, and she leaned against him contentedly. "Happy?" he asked softly. "More than I ever thought possible," Frances replied. "Some days I still cannot believe this is my life, that I get to have all this happiness after so much loss. You deserve every bit of it." Fletcher kissed the top of her head. "You are the strongest person I know, and the kindest. You took in a stranger and saved his life, and in doing so you saved mine in more ways than one. I was so lost before I found you, Frances. I was just drifting from place to place, never putting down roots, never letting myself hope for more than the next job, the next arrest. You gave me a home and a family and a reason to build a future." "You did the same for me," Frances said softly. "I was just existing, not really living. You reminded me that life could be joyful again, that I was allowed to be happy. That day I collapsed against that tree on your property, bleeding and half dead, was the luckiest day of my life," Fletcher said, "because it led me to you." "You took the axe and split your life to share," Frances murmured, remembering that first morning when Fletcher had insisted on helping with the kindling despite his injury. "You gave me half of everything you had, everything you were, and in return you got my whole heart." "I would make the same choice 1,000 times over," Fletcher said firmly. Every moment with you is a gift." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear overhead, each lost in their own thoughts but connected by the love they shared. Inside the cabin, Matthew stirred and made a small sound, and Francis rose to check on him. Fletcher followed, and together they stood over their son's cradle, watching him sleep. "I want more," Francis said suddenly. "More children, I mean. I want Matthew to have siblings, to grow up in a house full of love and laughter." "Then we will have more," Fletcher agreed readily. "As many as you want. This cabin is getting too small anyway. I have been thinking about adding on, building proper bedrooms and maybe a separate room for cooking." "That would be wonderful." Francis leaned against him, imagining their cabin transformed into a real home, bustling with children and filled with joy. Over the next few years, that vision became reality. Fletcher added onto the cabin, turning it into a proper house with multiple bedrooms and a large kitchen. Francis gave birth to a daughter they named Grace in 1880, and then another son, Daniel, in 1882. Sarah married a neighboring rancher and had children of her own, and the families spent holidays and birthdays together, creating a tight-knit community. The ranch prospered under Fletcher's management. He had a natural talent for working with cattle and horses, and word spread about the quality of his stock. He was able to reduce his work as a marshal to only occasional assignments, preferring to spend his time building their home and raising their children. Frances continued her sewing, though now it was more for pleasure than necessity. She made clothes for her children and beautiful quilts that she sold to the mercantile in town, earning her own money that she saved carefully for the children's futures. She also became known for her healing skills, the knowledge she had gained nursing first her husband, and then Fletcher serving her well when neighbors needed medical assistance. Matthew grew into a bright, curious boy who loved helping his father with the ranch work. Grace was sweet and gentle, but with a core of steel very much like her mother's. Daniel was only a toddler, but already showed signs of having his father's easy charm and quick smile. One evening in the summer of 1883, 6 years after their wedding, Fletcher and Frances sat on the porch after putting the children to bed. The additions to the house were complete, and they had just celebrated a successful sale of cattle that would keep them comfortable through the winter and beyond. "You ever regret it?" Frances asked suddenly. "Giving up your career as a marshal, settling down here instead of continuing to adventure out in the world?" Fletcher looked at her in genuine surprise. "Regret? Not for a single moment. This life, this family, this home we have built together is worth more than any adventure or accolade I could have gained elsewhere." He took her hand and kissed it gently. "You and our children are my greatest achievement, Frances. Everything else pales in comparison. I just want you to be happy." "I am happy, deliriously, completely happy." Fletcher pulled her close. "Every morning I wake up next to you and think about how lucky I am. I get to spend my days working land that belongs to us, raising children who are healthy and loved, building a future with the woman I adore." "What more could any man want?" "I love you," Frances whispered, "so much that sometimes it overwhelms me." "I love you too, always and forever." As the years passed, their love only deepened. They weathered droughts and harsh winters, celebrated good harvests and successful cattle sales, nursed each other and their children through illnesses, and supported each other through the inevitable challenges of frontier life. Their home became known as a place of warmth and welcome, where travelers could count on a hot meal and a safe place to sleep, where neighbors gathered for celebrations and consolation. In 1885, Frances gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl they named Samuel and Rose. The house that had seemed so spacious suddenly felt full to bursting, but it was a good kind of full, the kind that came from abundance and love. Fletcher expanded the barn and hired permanent help, acknowledging that the ranch had grown beyond what one man could handle alone. Matthew, now 7 years old, was already showing promise as a horseman and rancher. He followed Fletcher everywhere, soaking up knowledge and skill. Grace, at 5, was her mother's shadow, learning to cook and sew and garden. Daniel, at 3, was the family comedian, always making everyone laugh with his antics. On their 8th wedding anniversary, Fletcher surprised Francis with a gift: a beautiful piano he had ordered from Denver at considerable expense. It took 6 men to get it up the mountain and into their house, but the look on Francis's face when she saw it made every penny and every bit of effort worthwhile. "You said once that you used to play as a child," Fletcher explained as Francis ran her fingers reverently over the keys. "I wanted you to have that joy back in your life." "This is too extravagant," Francis protested, even as she sat down and began to pick out a simple melody. "Nothing is too extravagant for you." Fletcher stood behind her, his hands on her shoulders. "You have given me everything. The least I can do is give you something that brings you joy." Francis learned to play again, her skills rusty at first but quickly improving. Soon the house was filled with music, and the children begged for lessons. Grace showed particular talent, and Francis spent happy hours teaching her daughter to play. In the winter of 1887, Fletcher received word that his father had died. He traveled back to Boston for the funeral, taking Francis with him and leaving the children in Sarah's capable care. It was Francis's first trip east, and she was overwhelmed by the size and bustle of the cities they passed through. Boston itself was a revelation. Fletcher's family lived in a mansion in a fashionable neighborhood, and his mother and siblings welcomed Francis with a mixture of curiosity and condescension that made Fletcher's jaw tighten with anger. "So you are the frontier woman who captured our Fletcher's heart," his mother said at dinner the first night, her tone making it clear what she thought of frontier women in general. "I am," Francis said calmly, refusing to be intimidated. "And Fletcher captured mine. We have built a good life together in Colorado, and we are very happy. Happy living in a cabin in the middle of nowhere with no culture, no society, no refinement," Fletcher's younger sister Evelyn said with a delicate shudder. "It is not a cabin, it is a proper house," Fletcher said sharply. "And we have more culture and refinement than you might think. We also have something you seem to lack: genuine community and purpose. Every person in Loveland knows they can count on their neighbors, that they are valued and appreciated for who they are, not what they own or who their family is." The trip was tense and uncomfortable, and both Fletcher and Francis were relieved when it was time to return home. On the train heading west, Fletcher pulled Francis close. "I am sorry you had to endure that. My family can be incredibly snobbish." "It does not matter," Francis said honestly. "I know who we are and what we have built together. Their opinions cannot change that. You are remarkable, do you know that?" Fletcher kissed her tenderly. "Most women would have been crushed by the way they treated you. I learned a long time ago that the only opinions that matter are those of the people I love and respect. Your family may not approve of me, but our children love me, our friends respect me, and most importantly, you chose me. That is more than enough." When they returned to Colorado, they were greeted by their children running out of Sarah's house and throwing themselves into their parents' arms. Matthew shouted about the new colt that had been born while they were gone. Grace cried because she had missed her mother so much. Daniel wanted to show off a new trick he had learned, and the twins just clung to Francis and refused to let go. "This," Fletcher said, looking at his family gathered around him, "this is what matters. Not Boston society or family approval or anything else. Just this." The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own joys and challenges. The ranch prospered, becoming one of the most successful in the area. Fletcher's reputation as a fair and honest man brought him opportunities to serve on the town council and eventually as mayor of Loveland, positions he accepted reluctantly but fulfilled conscientiously. Frances became known throughout the territory for her healing skills and her kindness. During an outbreak of influenza in 1889, she nursed half the town through the illness, working day and night until she collapsed from exhaustion. Fletcher was terrified he might lose her, but she recovered and went right back to helping others as soon as she was able. "You have to take care of yourself," Fletcher scolded her gently. "I cannot lose you. I would not survive it." "You would survive," Frances said. "Because you would have to, for the children. Just as I survived losing Thomas because I had to. But I have no intention of leaving you anytime soon. We have too many years ahead of us still." Matthew grew into a fine young man, tall and strong like his father, with his mother's gray eyes and gentle nature. At 16, he was already running much of the day-to-day operations of the ranch, showing a business acumen that impressed everyone. Grace, at 14, was beautiful and talented, her piano playing the highlight of every social gathering in town. Daniel, at 13, was the family adventurer, always pushing boundaries and testing limits, but with a good heart that kept him out of serious trouble. The twins, Samuel and Rose, were 8 years old and inseparable, finishing each other's sentences and getting into twice the mischief that a single child could manage. In 1891, on a crisp autumn day, Matthew came home with news that surprised everyone. He had fallen in love with Sarah's daughter Emily, and he wanted to marry her. "You are only 18, Frances said, her mother's heart aching at the thought of her baby getting married even though she herself had been married at 22. The same age father was when he became a marshal and went out on his own, Matthew pointed out reasonably. "And Emily and I have known each other our whole lives. I love her, Mother. I want to build a life with her, the way you and Father built a life together." Fletcher and Frances exchanged a long look, an entire conversation happening in that glance the way it could between people who had been married for many years. Finally, Fletcher nodded. "If you are certain, and if Emily's parents approve, then you have our blessing. But you will have a long engagement, at least a year. Marriage is not something to rush into." Matthew agreed readily, and the engagement was announced at Christmas. Emily was a sweet girl, practical and hardworking like her mother Sarah, and Frances could see that she and Matthew were genuinely in love. Planning the wedding gave Frances and Sarah a wonderful project to work on together, and the friendship between the two women deepened even further. The wedding took place the following November, a beautiful ceremony in the same church where Fletcher and Frances had married 14 years earlier. As Frances watched her eldest son pledge his life to Emily, she found tears streaming down her face. "What is wrong?" Fletcher whispered, concerned. "Nothing is wrong. Everything is right. I am just remembering our wedding day, how happy I was, how hopeful about the future. And now here we are, watching our son start his own journey." She squeezed Fletcher's hand tightly. "Thank you for giving me this life. Thank you for stumbling onto my property that day, half dead and bleeding. Thank you for staying, for loving me, for building this incredible family with me." "Thank you for taking a chance on me," Fletcher replied, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "For seeing past the blood and the danger to the man underneath. For giving me a home and a purpose and more love than I ever dreamed possible." After the wedding, Matthew and Emily moved into a small house on the ranch property that Fletcher had built for them as a wedding present. Having them nearby was a blessing, And soon the family was celebrating again as Emily announced she was expecting a child, Francis's first grandchild, a boy named Thomas Matthew Grant, was born in August of 1893. Holding the baby in her arms, Frances felt a sense of completeness she had not known was missing. The wheel of life continued to turn, bringing new joy and new hope with each generation. "We are grandparents," Fletcher said in wonder, looking down at the sleeping baby. "When did we get old enough to be grandparents? We are not old," Frances protested. "I am only 40 and you are 42. We have years ahead of us still." "Years I intend to spend with you," Fletcher said, pulling her close carefully so as not to disturb the baby. "Growing old with you is the greatest privilege of my life." Grace married at 19, a young lawyer who had recently moved to Loveland and been instantly smitten with her beauty and musical talent. Daniel followed Matthew into the ranch business, showing a particular skill with horses that made him invaluable. The twins were still children at 12, but already showing their own unique personalities and talents. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1897, Fletcher and Frances took a trip alone together for the first time in years, leaving the children and grandchildren in Matthew and Emily's capable care. They traveled to Denver and stayed in a fine hotel, attending the opera and eating in elegant restaurants, and simply enjoying being a couple rather than parents and grandparents. "We should do this more often," Frances said as they walked through the Denver Botanical Gardens hand in hand. "I love our children and grandchildren desperately, but it is nice to just be us for a while." "Agreed." Fletcher stopped walking and turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Frances Grant, you are even more beautiful to me now than you were the day we married. Every year with you has been a gift. Every challenge we have faced together. Every joy has been doubled because I got to share it with you. You are my partner, my best friend, my great love, and I want you to know that I would not change a single thing about our life together. Even the hard parts, the droughts and the illnesses and the arguments, even those, because they made us stronger. They taught us to lean on each other, to trust each other completely." He pulled her into his arms and kissed her softly. "I love you, Frances. More today than yesterday and less than I will tomorrow." Frances was crying now, tears of joy streaming down her face. "I love you too. You took a broken widow and made her whole again. You gave me a reason to live and to love and to hope. You are my everything, Fletcher Grant." They returned home renewed, ready to face whatever the future might bring. And the future brought plenty. More grandchildren, the expansion of the ranch, Fletcher's retirement from all official duties so he could focus on family, Frances's continued work as a healer and mentor to younger women in the community. In 1900, as a new century dawned, the Grant family gathered for a massive celebration at the ranch. Matthew and Emily were there with their 4 children, Grace and her husband with their 3, Daniel and his new wife Sarah, named for her aunt, with their infant son, and the twins, Samuel and Rose, now 17 and on the verge of adulthood themselves. Fletcher stood on the porch of the house he had built with his own hands and looked out at the sea of faces, children, grandchildren, friends, neighbors. Sarah and her family were there, as were many of the people who had been at his and Frances's wedding 23 years earlier. The ranch stretched out around them, prosperous and beautiful, a testament to years of hard work and love. "I want to say a few words," Fletcher announced, and the crowd quieted. 23 years ago, I came to this property as a stranger, wounded and desperate. The woman who owned it could have turned me away, left me to die in the snow. But she did not. Frances Stanton, as she was then, took me in and saved my life. And in doing so, she gave me everything: a home, a family, a purpose, a future. This ranch, this community, all these beautiful people gathered here tonight, exist because one woman had the courage and compassion to help a stranger in need. He turned to Frances, who was sitting in a chair nearby, and held out his hand. She stood and came to his side, and he wrapped his arm around her waist. "I split Kindling with you on this very property on my first morning here, too stubborn to admit I was still too weak to do much of anything. But in that moment, I think I knew. I knew that I wanted to split everything with you, the work and the joy, the sorrow and the triumphs, the mundane and the extraordinary. I wanted to share my life with you in every way possible, and you let me. You opened your heart and your home and your life to me, and I have spent every day since trying to be worthy of that gift." "You have been more than worthy," Frances said softly, her voice carrying in the stillness. "You have been my partner in every sense of the word. Together we built this ranch, raised our children, created a legacy that will live on long after we are gone. And we did it with love, always with love." The crowd erupted in applause and cheers, and their children came forward to embrace them. As the celebration continued around them, Fletcher and Frances slipped away, walking together to the small hill behind the house where Thomas Stanton was buried. A simple marker stood over his grave, maintained carefully over the years. "Thank you, Thomas," Fletcher said quietly. "Thank you for loving Frances first, for building this cabin, for giving her the foundation she needed to survive your loss. I hope I have honored your memory by loving her as fiercely and completely as she deserves to be loved." "He would have liked you," Frances said, taking Fletcher's hand. "He always said he wanted me to be happy. I think he would be pleased to see what we have built here, how our love has created something beautiful and lasting." They stood in silence for a moment, paying their respects to the past, before turning together to walk back toward the house, toward the future, toward the family they had created together through love and hard work and unwavering commitment to each other. The years continued to pass, bringing both joy and sorrow as years always do. They lost Sarah to a sudden heart attack in 1903, a loss that devastated Fletcher and left Frances bereft of her closest friend. But they mourned together and helped Sarah's family through their grief, demonstrating once again the power of community and love. More grandchildren were born, and then great-grandchildren. Matthew took over complete management of the ranch, running it with skill and wisdom learned from his father. Grace became a music teacher, her home always filled with the sound of students practicing their scales and arpeggios. Daniel started a horse breeding program that became renowned throughout Colorado. Samuel became a doctor, inspired by his mother's healing work, while Rose married a journalist and moved to Denver, where she wrote passionately about women's rights and social justice. Through it all, Fletcher and Frances remained devoted to each other, their love a constant in a changing world. They grew old together gracefully, their hair turning white, their faces showing the lines of decades of laughter and tears. But their eyes still lit up when they looked at each other. Their hands still sought each other out automatically. Their connection still as strong as it had been that first winter when a wounded lawman collapsed on a widow's property and changed both their lives forever. On a spring morning in 1915, at the age of 62, Frances woke to find Fletcher standing by the window, looking out at the sunrise over their land. "Cannot sleep?" she asked, joining him and slipping her arm around his waist. "I was just thinking about everything we have accomplished, everything we have built." He pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. "When I think about that boy I was, that restless deputy marshal searching for meaning and purpose, and I compare him to the man I am now, content and fulfilled and surrounded by love, I can hardly believe they are the same person." "You were always this man," Francis said. "You just needed the right circumstances to bring it out." "I needed you," Fletcher corrected gently. "You are the one who made me whole, who gave me everything I needed to become the man I was meant to be." "We made each other whole," Francis said. "That is what true love does. It does not complete you as if you were lacking before, but it brings out the best in you, helps you become the fullest version of yourself." They stood together watching the sun rise over the mountains, over the land they had worked for decades, over the ranch that would be their legacy long after they were gone. And in that moment, Frances felt a profound sense of peace and gratitude. She had loved and lost and learned to love again. She had built a life from the ashes of grief and created something beautiful and lasting. "What are you thinking?" Fletcher asked. "I am thinking about that day you took the axe and insisted on splitting Kindling even though you could barely stand. About how in that moment you were offering me more than just help with the wood. You were offering to share your life with me, to split everything down the middle and make it ours instead of mine or yours." "I would do it again," Fletcher said firmly. "Every day, in every way, I choose to share my life with you. That is what love is, Francis. Not just the grand gestures or the passionate moments, but the daily choice to be there, to contribute, to build something together." "I choose you too," Francis said. "Today and every day." As the sun climbed higher in the sky, they turned together and walked back to the house, ready to face whatever the day might bring. Because they would face it together, as they had faced everything for nearly 40 years. Hand in hand, heart to heart, two people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances and built a love that would endure for all their days. Their story was not a fairy tale. There were no magic solutions or perfect endings. But it was real and true and deeply human, a testament to the power of compassion and courage and commitment. Frances had split Kindling for her stove on a cold January morning, and Fletcher had taken the axe and split his life to share. And in that sharing, they had created something magnificent. A love that transcended grief and hardship, a family that would carry their legacy forward, and a home that would always stand as a symbol of what was possible when two people chose to face life together with open hearts and unwavering faith in each other. The years rolled on, and Fletcher and Frances Grant lived them fully, surrounded by love and family and the land they had tamed together. When they finally passed, peacefully and within days of each other in their 80s, it was said throughout Loveland, and beyond that theirs had been a love story for the ages, proof that even in the harsh and unforgiving landscape of the Old West, love could flourish and endure. Their descendants continued to work the ranch for generations, each one adding their own chapter to the story, but always remembering the foundation that Frances and Fletcher had built, a foundation of love, trust, partnership, and the daily choice to share everything, to split life down the middle and face it together, come what may.